Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, but I wanted to leave you a short message of Thanksgiving greeting on behalf of the Sacred Heart community, wherever you may be celebrating this upcoming holiday. I had an opportunity to visit a couple of our classes in Sacred Heart School and to share with them a few thoughts about some things I read about the first celebration of this Thanksgiving and how it eventually became a national holiday. And there are two things that struck me about it. The first, and this is often glossed over by our secular society as we decorate with native people and pilgrims and turkeys, the idea that that first celebration was a religious event. From its very foundation, it was a religious holiday. And the second one is that it was celebrated in a time of dire need. It wasn't celebrated in a time of great abundance. It was a determined act of the will by these early settlers to publicly state and reaffirm for one another that they were going to trust in God's providence as they made their best effort to survive in this new land. That early group of pilgrims on the Mayflower, they met with adversity right from the very beginning. Not everybody in their group were seeking religious liberty. There were apparently a few felons who were fleeing the law. I'm told there was loss of life even sailing here because of illness, and I think because of at least one fellow who was attempting to cause mayhem. He was apparently concerned that they weren't all going to be able to survive the trip and turn to violence. So there was loss of life even in the sailing. But when they arrived, I think there were 102 pilgrims who survived to land on the coast. Even then, they met with great hardship. The crops that they had intended to plant, the seeds that they brought, not all of them took in this new soil and in this new climate. And the weather was harsh, so they lost some of their crops. And they began to starve to death. The supplies that they had were limited. And so in that very first year they were here, I read that 44 of them starved to death. And the remaining 58, they were down to a ration of 5 kernels of corn per day. That's how desperate the situation was. They didn't know if they had a future in the land. They met with some hostility with some native peoples. But eventually they met a tribe that was curious to meet them and open to trading with them. And they were fortunate in that they met a native person named Squanto who served as an interpreter. So they were able to exchange some of their tools and items that they had for food to buy them some extra hope and extra opportunity. But ultimately, things were fairly precarious. And these 58 pilgrims were joined in that first celebration by over 80 native people who brought venison and turkey meat, and they shared what they had. But for the most part, it was a focus on the reading of the Psalms and praying and offering thanks to God for his providence, and particularly just the fact that they were alive. Later on, when this holiday got codified as a national holiday under the time of Abraham Lincoln, you can see that it was again a time of crisis. It was just after the Civil War, the bloodiest war in American history. Every loss of life was American, obviously, because it was a civil war. And just imagine how many families were met with hardship, with destroyed homes, with loss of life in their families. And now this nation was trying to rebuild itself. And Abraham Lincoln called for a time of coming together. And once again, in a time of trial and adversity, asking people to trust in God's providence and give thanks to him. That same religious character was a part of that holiday. He specifically said it was important that we give thanks to God the Father Almighty going forward, and to trust in his blessings. These two takeaways are so timely for 2020 because there are a lot of people probably that you would speak with today who might be a little pessimistic or cynical and might ask the question, what is there to be thankful for this year? In 2020, we've had economic collapse. We've had loss of life. We have a pandemic. Here locally, we had the worst wildfire in Oregon's history, where there were 42,000 people displaced. About 15% of our parish lost their homes. And on you can list one hardship after another. It's been just a record-breaking year of heavy news. And so it's understandable if you met a person who say, I can't find a reason to be grateful this year. It's impossible for me. Well, on a natural level, that might be true. That might be a temptation. But we're not called to be natural. We're called to be supernatural. And I think this year we would do ourselves well by getting in touch with that spirit that was displayed by our earlier ancestors, those who came before, those who began this celebration. They had eyes of faith to be able to see, to find something to be grateful for, even though situations were dire. We need to tap into that same spirit this year. And that's my message to you all. If it's harder work to find something to be grateful for, maybe all the better. It can be a powerful prayer for us to really become contemplative and reflect on ways that God has preserved us in this year of trial and adversity. And I hope you'll take the time to remember those original roots, that it really has been from the beginning a determined act of the will to find goodness in the world when it's not so easy to see, and to direct that spirit of gratitude up to God. That's how I want to celebrate it this year, even though we have greater restrictions on travel, even though we have greater restrictions on the number of people who can gather, even though we're facing every kind of obstacle. Let's not let the circumstances crush that spirit. Let's make sure and give thanks to God this year, and once again, turn to him in trust for his providence to get us through the challenges we face here in 2020 and beyond. God bless you all. Have a very happy Thanksgiving. And if you're not able to join us here locally, we will lift you up in prayer wherever you may be. And see you soon.